Okay. This is a Sikha of Parshas Lekutei Sichas, book 22, Chelek Lamed Chaf Beis, the Sikha of Tazria, the second Sikha. In the beginning, this is a portion that speaks about the skin afflictions that can come to a person. It's commonly translated, the word sarat is commonly translated leprosy. That's not really a proper translation. Sarat was something that was an affliction of the skin that didn't come as a result of any bacteria. It came simply as a sign from heaven. It was a heavenly kind of skin affliction. And as we'll see, it comes because of activities that a person engaged in, particularly activities related to speech, negative speech, which caused the warning sign to appear on his body that, you better watch out because your behavior, your speech is improper. And if you keep on working, if you keep on acting like that, then your situation will worsen. Now, it wasn't a bad medical situation, but it was a ritually, a tuma and tahara. The laws of purity, ritual purity and ritual impurity were implemented on a person. If a person became tameh, if a person became ritually impure through this skin affliction, and the Kohen has to come and be the one to make that decision. Once that verification has been made, the leper, let's call him the leper, but it's really not a sick leper. It's a ritually, biblically, a Torah concept of mitzvah. The mitzvah has to live outside the city for 7 days as part of the cleansing process. And the therapeutic process therein is you created divisiveness. The mitzvah created divisiveness by speaking negatively, which is why he got the skin affliction in the first place. Hashem was sending him a message, was sending him some kind of a therapeutic process that now go and sit outside the city. Don't forget, they didn't have WhatsApp, they didn't have telephone, they didn't have communication. If you were outside the city in seclusion, you were cut off from society. And that's what negative speech does within society. When you spread gossip and slander, people that were friendly, all of a sudden you tell somebody, you know that Yankel, you think he's your friend? I know he's going to your top client and trying to undercut your price and take away your client from you. Now, it may or not be true, but most people don't go and verify it from their friend. They just believe. There's just this. The Gemara says there's this this illogical kind of success to slander and to gossip that people believe it. I mean, the guy's your friend. Why should you believe he's trying to undercut you? But people believe it. That's something embedded within the world somehow, I guess, to make it more of a challenge. So for doing that, you're separating people. Or imagine a husband hears gossip about his wife, or wife about a husband, or children about their parents about their children. This tears about families. This can tear apart friendships and communities. And that's why a person who engages in that and has received God's punishment of being afflicted with skin affliction, and now he has to be outside the city. Outside the city, you have time, 7 days in seclusion, time to meditate. Imagine when we had the corona seclusion, quarantine for 14 days. Imagine there was no telephones, no WhatsApp, and no internet. So with that introduction, we'll jump into the Sikha. L'chaim, in the beginning of the laws of the skin afflictions, the way they pertain to a human, to a man, it says, when a man has on his Adam, when an Adam, a man, person, it doesn't just mean a man or woman, a person has on the skin of his flesh this affliction, and the language that the Torah identifies the person here is with the language Adam. Now we know there's 4 ways of defining or describing in Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, 4 ways of saying a person. You could say Adam, or there's another word Ish, there's another word Gever, another word Enosh. So another question. So the word Adam is the highest form of usage of the name denoting man. So we know the question. How is it possible that when we're talking here about a person that has a skin affliction, remember the skin affliction comes, it's a very stringent impurity, ritual impurity. And to the extent that our sages tell us, mitzorah chashuv kemet, somebody who is afflicted with this skin affliction is considered like dead. In other words, he's so spiritually defiled, is considered like dead. So why are we calling him an Adam? Adam is like a prominent person, not prominent because he has some money or something. Prominent because we talk prominence in Torah, it's because he's truly prominent. He's a good person. He's a righteous person. How is the righteous person and then telling us about a skin affliction that he may have, which the skin affliction of Mitzora is one of the most intensive kinds of impurity. How does a good person get intense impurity? So the Alter Rebbe explains that one is dependent on the other. Because he's such a high-level person and is at the level that we call him the highest depiction of man, Adam, that's why he's afflicted with his skin affliction. You know why? Because the skin affliction is skin deep. You know, when we say about something, it's skin deep, it means it didn't affect the internal person. Similarly, if God forbid, Chalila v'chas, somebody has some kind of a sickness on the skin, it's one level of sickness, but somebody, God forbid, has sickness in the internal organs, that's a totally different story. So here we're talking about a person, where is the affliction coming? It's not just random. This is divinely planned, that the affliction comes on his skin. In other words, this is a person who internally has reached the proper levels of piety. We're calling him an Adam, highest level person. Yet it's possible that at the outside, he has some things that are on his periphery are not fully cleansed, and therefore he gets an affliction on his periphery, on his skin. Actually, the Alshich explains, one of the several hundred years ago commentary on the Torah, Moshe Alshich was a great Kabbalist. He explains that by Rishaim, who are generally speaking impure, you wouldn't even notice if they had the skin affliction. He's impure. Well, it's a subtle thing. In order to pick up on a subtle level of ritual impurity, the person needs to be at the level where subtleties make a difference, right? So what we're saying here is that when there's only this psolet, when there's only this waste, there's only this decrepitness in his external aspects, at the end, so to speak, of his garments, or the garments of his soul, that's when there could be this ritual impurity that comes on his skin. And that's why the Alter Rebbe explains, the Alter Rebbe says that the mitzvah of these skin afflictions is not practically applicable these days after the temple's destruction, because the whole thing was a miraculous thing. As the Rambam says, the Rambam doesn't bring that it's not applicable now. The Rambam says it technically is, but it practically is not, because it doesn't happen today. Why doesn't it happen today? Because there isn't the great people that are fully rectified internally. And the only thing they have is the negativity on the periphery. It doesn't exist anymore. We've all become internally, we have internal negativity as well. So it would be wasted, or we're not at the high level where the only place that Hashem can send a message is at the skin level. So it doesn't apply now. Not that it doesn't apply. The mitzvah applies always, says the Rambam. But practically, we're not at that level where that takes place.
So you can't call anyone Adam anymore?
No, so we can still call everybody Adam. But yes, technically, if you want to talk about reaching the highest levels of what an Adam depicts, that's what we're saying. That everybody still has other more significant things to rectify, not just skin level. So we have to understand paragraph 2. Our sages say that the concept of the skin affliction comes, as I just described to you in our introduction, comes because of the sin of negative speech, right? And in order to offset the negative speech, Hashem sends him this thing that makes him ritually impure, and therefore makes him expelled to outside the city, right? But the sin of Lashon Hara, the sin of negative speech, just one second. However, the sin of negative speech, we know Lashon Hara is considered one of the worst 3 sins. In other words, we know that there's 3 things we give up our life for. Everything else, if somebody's life is in danger, you violate the Torah. There's absolutely, if a person's starving to death, the only thing to eat is not kosher, it's not kosher to keep himself alive, because you're not supposed to die for the mitzvah of kosher. But there's 3 things that we are supposed to die for idolatry, for adultery, and for not taking somebody else's life. If somebody says, shoot the other person, or God forbid, you'll lose your life, you're not allowed to proactively shoot somebody else. The basis of war, by the way, we're in a time of war, is self-defense. If somebody comes to kill you, they lose that right for their life, but that's a different topic. But our sages say that really there's a fourth thing that is as stringent in the weightiness of it, and that is lashon hara, speaking evil about somebody else. So, but Mela, and it's considered, our sages tell us elsewhere that it's considered as if you deny Hashem himself. That's the weightiness of it. As the Rambam Maimonides speaks at length in the laws of human behavior, deyot, the way a person has to act. So how can we say that that we're talking here about a person who's at the highest level of piety, and we're calling him an Adam? Hey, we're talking about the subtleties of negativity that he still has. If he's talking negative prattle, negative speech, he's internally flawed. And the question becomes even bigger. The severity of somebody who speaks lashon hara, negative speech, is brought by the Rambam in this very law that speaks about the laws of skin afflictions, which the Alter Rebbe brings. So the Alter Rebbe brings this Rambam, quoting the Rambam, saying it's not a natural affliction, it's a ma'aseh nisim, it's a miraculous thing, right? It's therefore not existent in our time. That level of divine revelation where somebody talks negatively and all of a sudden, boom, something appears on his skin. It doesn't exist anymore. But there itself, the Rambam says that it comes from the sin of talking negatively. And the Rambam himself says that, the Rambam at length says that lashon hara is like denying God. It's such a terrible, horrible thing. It tears away at the fabric of relationships, and therefore it's actually antagonistic to God himself. And yet the Alter Rebbe in the very same breath, quoting that Rambam, says that we're talking here about Adam, highest level, only skin deep. What kind of skin deep? This is a guy who's talking negative speech. What's going on here? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Lashon hara is one of the worst things. So why are we calling him Adam? Paragraph 3. So we'll understand this by first understanding, let's delve into the Rambam that we're referencing to, but let's delve into it a little bit more depth. After the Rambam explains that in general, the skin afflictions come because of the sin of lashon hara, and he brings the teaching from Miriam. Here it's important, let's give us a background about Miriam. Miriam spoke to Aaron, and she said, hey, what's with Moshe Rabbeinu that he's separated from his wife, ostensibly because he was in a relationship with God, and being in a married relationship would have required that there would be times that he would need to immerse and wait and not be available at the state of holiness. In the immediacy of his relationship with God, he needed to always be available 24/7 on call, and therefore he was not able to be married in an earthly way. So Miriam and Aaron said, did Hashem only speak to Moshe? He speaks to us as well, and we're still all married. So this was a comment they made, and then because of that, Miriam got hit with mitzorah, with sarat, with the skin affliction for 7 days. With the skin affliction, then they had to wait 7 days for her. They didn't travel onwards. So what do we learn from the story of Miriam? We learn that lashon hara is something that brings, just like Miriam spoke about Moshe, negative speech brings this skin affliction. Then he continues and he says, something that seems to have no connection to lashon hara, at least not in the context of the laws of the skin afflictions. And here we're going to quote the Rambam, Lishono, we're going to quote his thing. I'm going to paraphrase, but this is the exact wording of the Rambam. The Rambam says, how much more so, once I told you about Miriam, who spoke about Moshe, and she really said something very subtle. She wasn't being disrespectful. She was really also championing the cause of Moshe's wife. Why did he separate from his wife? But still, she was talking, she was criticizing Moshe Rabbeinu. So if even for that little subtle criticism by a sister, there's the Hashem reacts in a way of tzarat, in the way of the skin affliction, how much more so? And now comes the paraphrasing of the Rambam, how much more so people, wicked, negative people, silly people that speak at length, big and wondrous things. In other words, they're speaking preposterous things, I think, like unrealistic things, shooting the breeze. And that's the way the empty kind of people and the negative people speak. In the beginning, they just start talking about divrei havai, means like irrelevant things and sometimes even impossible things. But once they talk about these major gross exaggerations, like tabloids kinds of headlines, which never were, just trying to get attention. What happens from that is then they come to speak denigratingly about righteous people. They're just, shooting the breeze in a negative way, in a sensational kind of way, and then they start denigrating the righteous, the tzaddikim. And because of that, they get used to speaking about the good people. Then they start denigrating and speaking negatively about the prophets, and then they start casting aspersions and being cynical about whether the words of the prophets are true. From that, for the degenerate, they speak against God and they deny the basis of our faith in God. That's the kind of speech of negative people, of Rishayim, of wicked people, that it starts from the gossipers that sit at the street corners and they hang out at the conventions, or the gatherings of people of simple people, unlearned people, and they hang out and drink with the beer drinkers that just hang out in the bars and have nothing to speak about. But the kosher Jews, in other words, but the speech of Ksherei Yisrael, of people that are upright, what do they speak about? They speak about words of Torah. They speak words of wisdom. And that's why Hashem helps them, and Hashem makes them be able to merit that good things happen via them. So 1 second, let's understand here. First of all, here, we're talking about the prohibition of Lashon Hara, which causes a skin affliction. Why does the Rambam go into the details about the speech of the wicked? Now, he starts off at the beginning, it's not Lashon Hara, it's not bad speech. It's just futile speech, sensational speech, irrelevant speech, shooting the breeze. It's not bad yet per se in causing bad to somebody else. Why does he go into that etymology, or to the origin of what leads to negative speech? Who needs the origin? Just say this is the laws of skin disease. Say that the skin disease comes from negative speech. Even if you want to say that because Lashon Hara is just one of the components of how the wicked people speak, and that's why once he mentioned about the stringency of speaking Lashon Hara, so he goes back to the source, root level, and he says this is one of the elements of Sichat Reshaim, of the negative speech of wicked people, but it shouldn't be in the laws of Tumat Sarat, in the laws of the impurity of the skin afflictions. This should be where he primarily speaks about the laws of Lashon Hara. And that's a few books earlier in the Rambam, right at the beginning, second book of the Rambam. Actually, in the first book of the Rambam, the second set of laws is called Hilchot Deot, the laws of how a person should be conducting himself. And there he gives at great length the laws of what speech should be and what negative speech is. So this belongs there, it doesn't belong here. Here's just a detail in the fact that the negative skin affliction comes because of negative speech. But why the whole history of where negative speech comes from? Number two question is, if the Rambam wants to speak here about how bad, stringent, speaking Lashon Hara, speaking negative speech is, so he should have brought the stringent expressions that he's already mentioned earlier in the laws of behavior. And the contrary, even more so. In the laws of behavior, the Rambam brings what our sages says, that anybody who speaks Lashon Hara, it's like he denies God. In other words, the sin of Lashon Hara is not just an individualistic one of the 613. There's something so general about it that it's like you denied the very connection with God. He doesn't say that here. He says here that from Lashon Hara, from speaking negative speech, that can lead to denying God. Because of that, they're going to speak about other things. They're going to speak denigratingly about the wise people. They're going to be cynical about the prophets, and then they're actually even going to deny God. But it doesn't say here what he says in the laws of behavior, that speaking bad speech is actually a form of denying God. Why doesn't he say it? Why does he build up here that from Lashon Hara you lead to denying God, whereas in the laws of Lashon Hara it says speaking Lashon Hara is denying God. So now we're going to explain that there's two things. Although we're calling them both Lashon Hara, bad speech, there's two meanings here in what we're saying bad speech. This is the crux of the explanation. So first of all, like this, paragraph 4. You can say the explanation is, with the lengthiness of the Rambam explaining the speech of the negative, the Rambam wants to explain that over here, when I say Lashon Hara, what does it mean, negative speech? And why this negative speech that he's talking about leads to a skin affliction. It's not yet speaking bad about somebody else. Because there's 2 points to Lashon Hara. First of all, they're speaking Lashon Hara, which comes from the decrepitness and the negative character traits of the individual. A person has jealousy, a person has hatred, and that leads him to speak viciously or negatively about somebody else. And therefore, when he's speaking, because he's a bad person, there's a badness in him, or there's a jealousy in him, or there's a vindictiveness in him, or there's a hatred in him. And because of that, he's speaking Lashon Hara, bad speech about somebody else. He goes and gossips and tells and instigates, right? It's actually creating havoc for somebody else. About this concept of Lashon Hara, that's what the Rambam speaks about in the laws of behavior, Hilchot Deot, the way a person has to have an approach to life. Because there the Rambam speaking about what the interaction between people, and he's bemoaning and telling us what we have to stay away from in terms of negative interaction between people. Here, however, the Rambam is talking about something else. He's talking about speech itself. He's talking about not what the speech affects negatively somebody else. He's speaking when a person there's a concept of negative speech, of futile speech, which in itself, before it does anything bad, even just in itself, is negative. Because the speech itself is going to bring the person into a bad place. It may not be bad yet, but that line of speech is negative speech, and it's going to pull him into a place, and later it's going to turn actually vicious. Because even though we would say speech is an interesting faculty, a person can live all their life without speaking, technically. Speech is a tool we have. Tanya, we call it a garment that we have for the person. The eye expresses itself in three ways: thought, speech, action. Speech is a tool through which we can communicate with the outside world. So it would seem that speech is a very outer level garment. Yet, speech has a very big power. It's actually an expression of the person himself. To the extent that when we want to identify the four species of creation, we speak about domem, inanimate, chai, vegetative, medaber, animal, chai, animal life, and medaber, human life. How do we define human? By the word medaber, speak. Speech is something that delineates, defines, and sets apart man from other mammals. So for that reason, when somebody speaks negative speech, even if it's not yet bad, but the negativity of the speech is something he's expressing himself in a non-positive way, that's going to pull him deeper into negativity. And by the way, in the footnote we quote here, one of the things we have to be careful of is speech. It's conventional wisdom says, speak about it. If you're angry about something, speak about it to get it out of you. Hasidic teaching says actually speech pulls you further into it. If you're angry about something, you speak about it, you start, sometimes, again, I'm not mixing into therapists' work if they have to do what they have to do, but talking about it sometimes just builds it up even more, because speech has that power to pull our very essence deeper into something than it was before. So paragraph 5, that's why the Rambam brings this whole long extrapolation of what speech is, because he's not yet talking about what leads to this negative skin afflictions is not yet vindictive speech or speech that's bad because of its effect of negativity on someone else. First, he talks about you have to be careful from having negative speech, just like the silly people and the bored people, or I shouldn't say bored people, the silly, the tipshim, the foolish people, that they speak at length, big bobomaises, sensational things that have no application, that have no bearing on reality. This is not yet bad. This hasn't yet created negativity to somebody else. The guy's shooting the yarn and he's just talking like an idiot, but nothing bad has happened to anybody else. But then he says that the speech of these cynical and negative and empty heads, first they just speak about all sensational things of just unrelated to actual negativity to somebody else. And that doesn't yet show that the person is a bad person, right? It's not yet a badness of the person. He's not doing anything bad. But these speech will then pull the person further into negativity, like the Rambam says, and eventually he'll find himself speaking against God. And this is why we talk here about Lashon Hara Sichat HaReshaim. We're not talking here about actual damaging speech. We're talking about the speech, Lashon Hara, the speech of the Reshaim, the speech of the negative. In other words, this is the way the negative people start. They speak this way, and then they get pulled into full-blown negativity, that their speech actually is negative in terms of its effect. And that's why the Rambam emphasizes right away at the beginning of this topic, when he's speaking about the afflictions coming, he says that when a person's skin begins to change color, and he becomes a mitzora, by definition of halacha, ritually impure, the person has to become separate and pronounced. Everybody now knows, hey, where's that guy? I haven't seen him in shul the last few days. Oh, he's been banished out of the city because he became a mitzvah. When a person knows that this is going to happen, he's not going to get involved in negative speech, which is what, and the Rambam again defines, what's he going to stay away from? He's going to stay away from leitzonus, from cynicism and negative speech. What's cynicism got to do with it? I mean, you're saying that it comes because of negative speech that's caused divisiveness, that's caused negativity. So why is he going to stay away from the speech of the wicked, from cynicism? What's wrong with cynicism? I mean, it's not good, but hasn't caused any damage to somebody else. No, but the Rambam is saying that the Lashon Hara I'm talking about here, which leads to skin afflictions, is just a detail and comes from the speech of the negative, just from idle speech, from negative speech, from speech that isn't purposeful, that's sensational, that leads to the wrong place, even if it's not yet in the wrong place. In other words, it's still that it's not an indication yet that the person has become a bad, vindictive, vicious person, but it's externally his speech. At his external level, he's speaking negative. He's not speaking well. He's not speaking like a wise person. He's not speaking purposefully. He's speaking, hanging out. And that speech, it's still outward. It still hasn't turned him into a bad person, but it will turn him into a bad person. It's still on the external levels. So when the punishment, paragraph 6. So now we'll understand what the Rambam says is at such great lengths, because the Rambam's trying to tell us, I'm learning this from Miriam. This fits in with Miriam. What was the story with Miriam? Because the Torah says, Zachor, one of the 6 remembrances we have every day is remember what Hashem did to Miriam. Why? Because we have to remember what happened to Miriam. Miriam's punishment came not because she spoke viciously or vindictively or something that was harmful to Moshe in some way. She didn't. But she spoke something that the speech was not positive. The speech was negative. In other words, Miriam raised Moshe Rabbeinu. She had every interest in him. It was her younger brother. Her youngest brother, probably. So she loved him. She saved him from the river. She didn't want to cause him any harm. That's not what her speech was about. But she didn't even intend to denigrate him. More than that, the Rambam says she didn't even speak denigrating. She made a mistake. She didn't realize that Hashem had acceded to his decision that he should separate from his wife. She thought it was something he was doing on his own accord. She would know that Hashem was the one who told him. She wouldn't have opened her mouth. So it was even a mistake. She didn't intend anything vicious. She didn't intend, but there wasn't anything. There wasn't anything damaging about her speech, but it wasn't good speech. And right away, even though just externally it wasn't good, it was words that she used that could have been misconstrued, that weren't so positive about Moshe Rabbeinu. Those words, even though they were so external, she didn't feel that way. She didn't feel anything about Moshe. Her words didn't cause any damage to Moshe. It's external, very external. Nonetheless, she got afflicted by the skin because Hashem, from the big tzaddikim, doesn't tolerate even external deviance. Right away, he sends a sign. And right, so that's what we're learning from Miriam, and that's why we'll understand now. Paragraph 7, why the Rambam gives a sequence that happens. The Torah says also that the Torah gives us a few kinds of ritual impurity that happens through discoloration. One is on the skin. The next one is on the clothing of a person. The next one is on the house of a person. Says the Rambam like this. The way it starts is actually in the reverse. The way it starts, Hashem sends this not as a punishment so much as a warning sign. First of all, the walls of his house change if he's speaking something not proper. And then if he still doesn't get the hint, the wall gets the skull, he has to start taking out a thing, and maybe his house becomes ritually impure. That should be enough of a hint to, whip himself into shape fully. If he didn't get the hint, so then the vessels in his house, the leather vessels also can be impure. If not, hey, his own clothing starts becoming discolored and needs to be thrown out because of ritual impurity. If not, God forbid, it comes to his skin. So in other words, this is the way things go. There's a sequence to the way things work. How does it work? That first of all, the walls of his house change. Then if he, how does it work? In other words, when a person starts to speak negative talk, in the beginning, it's so outward, it's so external, it has no bearing on him himself. And that's why what gets affected, the most external aspect of the person is actually his house. A house is where we live, but it's so far from us, right? It doesn't cling to us like clothing even. It surrounds us, what's called makif harachok, a surrounding a surrounding thing that's distant from us. Because the person, we're saying the person has spoken negatively, but on a very peripheral basis. So his extreme, his periphery has been affected. Then if he doesn't get better, then his clothing can become affected, right? If not, his very flesh. However, when a person is not at that level where it's only peripheral and it starts becoming internal, at that level, there's already Hashem cancels the whole program. In other words, when we've lost that sensitivity, that heightened sensitivity to holiness, and now we're already talking about next level, next generation negative speakers are not just like Miriam speaking negatively, and it's an outward issue. They're not really bad. They're not really a thing. Next level, next generation, they're already speaking viciously and vindictively. That's already comes from a bad that's become internalized in the person. Hashem says, sorry, I can't, that's not the subtleties that I intended to be dealing with when I talked about the laws of Negoim. And interestingly, that's why in the verse in Ha'ara 20, in footnote 20, the Rabbi says, the Safurnu says that the inner reason why there is no longer any of even the discoloration of the houses, the ritual impurity of the houses by discoloration of the stones, became even earlier on canceled, is because in order to have such a and some of our sages say in the Talmud that it never ever happened, because the subtlety of somebody being so pure that the only connection to have to negativity is that outwardness, just like the distance of the walls of the house from a person. It didn't really, that's something so high level, either it existed very, very seldomly or it didn't even exist. And we could say that that's why actually the Rambam, when he talks about the fact that this is miraculous, he actually says it about the laws of impurity on the house or on clothing. Because can you imagine when somebody does something wrong and the expression of it is in his house or in his clothing? That shows that he's such a good person that Hashem doesn't even want to give him a hint in his own flesh, even in his own skin. The skin is still the skin of a person. It goes next level. It goes next level of distance, and Hashem gives him a warning shot on his house or on his clothing. So actually, what comes out from here is, if you think about it a little deeper, is when Hashem is giving these signs, it's high level. The fact we don't have it is not because we're higher level. Oh, now we all speak good. No, it's because this kind of high level sensitivity, yeah, okay. According to this, we'll understand what the Alter Rebbe said. Remember, we started off. How does the Alter Rebbe say that the reason it's called Adam is because it's only skin level? What do you mean? Lashon hara is not a skin deep problem. No, because we're not talking here about regular Lashon hara vindictive speech, which is an indication of an internal problem. You're right. We're talking here about speech that's only speech of negativity in a really external way. It's not yet negative. It's something that is not positive. It's not meaningful, not purposeful speech. It'll going to lead to actual cynicism, and going to lead to actual denying God, and lead to viciousness. Right now, it's just an improper speech. So it's very subtle, very outer level. And the person is an Adam. He's a good person, a really great person, but he has this little subtlety. So Hashem may send him this warning sign in the skin. Ches, paragraph 8. According to this, we'll understand why the only way to rectify these negoim is only a kohen, because with l'chayre it's not understood, since we're talking about a complete person who has the ability to be able to refine all of his internal aspects, and he actually did it. So how does it come? We say that this guy has refined everything. Why hasn't he refined his externalities? That should be easier. If he's dealt with the real issues, most of the time, if we can deal with external issues, we can control our behavior, control our speech. But when we have to talk about controlling getting into the deep, inside of us, that's more difficult. But this guy we're saying he's fully complete in his insides, so why can't he fix his outsides? So the explanation is the fact that a person who's in all other ways a complete person, a wholesome person, the fact that he can fall into this negative speech, even though he already refined all of his internal things, is because there's something hidden, subtly, deep down, subconscious negativity, which is so deeply rooted in the person that he can't even access it. He can't find it in a revealed way. And this negativity expresses itself in speech sometimes. Sometimes when a person speaks, there's something that's guiding his speech that's from such a deep place he doesn't even know. And therefore, he doesn't have the ability to be able to. It's not really bad, but it's an indication there's something in there. So, besides for that, I mean, he doesn't speak actual bad because a wholesome person, a pious person, doesn't. But there's something in his speech that's not positive, it's not purposeful, and it's an indication of something deeper. So, in order to attack, in order to reach so deep, you need somebody very high. Who's the person who represents this high level of holiness to get to the most subconscious and hidden part of the soul that needs to be rectified? That's a Kohen. About Kohen, it says the level of Kohen represents in Kedusha, Chesed Ilah, supernal kindness of God. And that's why they were the representatives in the Beis Hamikdash to offer up the sacrifices. They represent some higher power, some higher manifestation, so to speak, of Hashem's presence in the world, which is called chesed, which is called kindness. They have the power, because they're so high, to dig deep and to be the ones to either to say judgment, to pass judgment on this negativity, which ultimately the judgment is not about being judgmental. It's about if it's ritually pure, then it means that the guy's healed automatically. If it's ritually impure, it's to go outside the city, and there's a process, and that will attack and get rid of the deep negativity. And that's why we need the speech of the Kohen. The Kohen has to say, you're pure, because through his speech, remember, speech has a power. We say the speech can sometimes express something deeper than we're able to be consciously aware of, but it's hinted at in the speech in a subconscious way. So the speech of the Kohen is reaching to some high level of Kedusha, of holiness, and it's able to dig deep and to rectify the negativity that may be lurking and hidden there, till the Metzayra, the leper, becomes totally pure. That's the Sicha. Enjoy.
Isn't that just saying though that the Kohen Gadol is a shrink? I mean, basically he's taking on the role of a Freudian psychoanalyst or something.
So it's a good point you're making. No, he's not a shrink, because he didn't talk to the person and analyze him and see where it's coming from. We're talking here about Hashem telling us about these things that are coming out in physical manifestations. The Kohen has to judge those and physically say pure. And at the same time, we're saying that what's taking place behind the scenes, indeed, are the deep psychological negativity going in and out. But it's happening kind of. Hashem gives us the buttons to push without actually going through all of the revealed psychology of it. You could say, yeah, good point.